Good evening, everyone. We'll be starting off today with the masterclass for performance management of ACCA. My name is CA Nithin Shetty, and I'll be taking you guys through certain important tips. See, in the last couple of months, most of you guys would have been working hard, really taking in efforts out of your busy work life, your personal lives for preparing for this exam. But finally, these last couple of weeks are those moments which count the most. And what all things can we be doing in these next couple of weeks in terms of making ourselves well prepared for our exams that will be there in another couple of weeks time. That's something that we are going to discuss comprehensively. And at the same point of time, there will be a Q&A session wherein if you guys have any queries in terms of how to prepare for your exams, how to be ready for the mock test, how can you attempt your examination with regards to CB resources, any of the queries that you have, feel free to get it cleared today itself in the entire session. Having said this, let's start off with the entire session today. Let me just share the screen. So we'll be starting first with the exam strategy, the things that you should be paying attention to whenever you'll be approaching the exams as such. Certain tips about how to go about with your exams, how to write your papers, what all things are important, how can you approach in the sense which questions to be approached first, how can you tackle each and every problem during your exams. That's something that we'll cover in our PM exam strategy. Post that, we'll move towards how are you going to keep your outlook in the next couple of weeks, because that's very important. You would have studied, you would have put in all your efforts in the last 2-3 months, but the next 2 weeks determines how are you going to increase your output, or say put in all whatever you have put in the last 2-3 months. How are you going to utilize that and maximize your scores in your examination? So we are going to discuss strategies pertaining to the next couple of weeks as well. At the same point of time, with regards to mocks, how are you going to appear for the mocks, what all things are going to be important. As you guys know that the exams are going to be in a computer based format, so what all things you need to prepare for, and finally some key topics, key concepts that are there for the examination, and to end it up with specific questions that you guys have pertaining to the exams. We would be more than happy to welcome those questions, and at the same point of time answer any queries you guys have pertaining to your exams. So let's start off with the examination strategy first. So as you guys might be knowing that your exam is of 3 hours 15 minutes. See, why is planning for the entire paper really important? Because what happens is, before you even start off with, if you could spend in around 10 to 15 minutes just to create a structure in your mind, that I'll be attempting this question, I'll be attempting that question, I'll be attempting this question. If you have that structure in mind, simultaneously at the back of the mind, you're also thinking about the possible answers for the same. So see, what happens is, in these 3 hours, if initially you gain in some positive confidence by answering in a few questions right correctly, it automatically adds into the later half of your journey in the examination. So what I would suggest is, while I would say that you should go for your best question first, I would also say go for the objectives questions first. The reason being, the answer for this is twofold. The first reason for why should we go for objectives rather than say section C at the start, it's basically because, see, those questions, the chances of you scoring fast and scoring high is really high in objectives. And secondly, what happens is, see, when you're done with objectives, even if you have possibly say do not know answers for a couple of them, you skip them, you move towards section C. In the section C, because it will be more like a brainstorming session for you, you will be reminding yourself with all those answers, theoretical answers, solving in sums. There is a high chance that you might be also reminded of the answers of your objectives, for which you can go back and answer them. So this helps you. So on the other hand, if you start off with section C, the problem that you may encounter is, say, you might get stuck up with one particular question, and that might demoralize you at that initial 40-50 minutes itself. I have quite a few examples of my dear students who, although had a good understanding of the entire paper, but couldn't complete the paper in the given 3 hours. Why? Because they were stuck up in their initial questions in section C, And at the same point of time, because they were demoralized, they ended up spending a lot of time trying to get an answer out of it. And while they moved towards the objectives, they hardly had any time and they just screwed up the paper in this scenario. So what I would want to suggest you guys is, although I would suggest you to go for your best question first, go for objectives and then proceed simultaneously towards section B and section C. Then don't waste a lot of time on objectives, as I already mentioned. The reason being, there are going to be scenarios, because see, you're just starting off with the paper. Your mind is not warmed up. So in the initial, say a half an hour or 45 minutes, even if you're not getting the answer to an objective question, what you can do is you can just skip it for now. You can move towards section B, section C. By the time you're done with section B, section C, right, mark yourselves, or as in time yourselves in a manner that you at least have a good 20 to 30 minutes at the end to revise, to check in your answers, to come back to your initial objective questions to see if there is something that has been missed out or not. So in that scenario, you will be able to remind yourselves, because by the time you'll be done with your section C, you would have literally revised the entire syllabus. So there is a high chance for you to come back to objectives and answer those if you have completed your section A, B and C simultaneously. Also, with regards to section C, this portion requires time. So that's another reason why I would suggest you not to start with section C. But at the same point of time, you would require a lot of practice for section C, specifically in this CBE format, in this Excel based format. Because see, most of us during our undergraduation days, we are used to writing answers on a piece of paper, solving sums on a piece of paper step by step. But we might not be that well versed with say the Excel formulas, or say solving in or writing in content, typing in content. So that's the reason why the more you practice section C on an Excel paper, on an Excel sheet, that would help you a lot in the long run, specifically for the exams. In case of section C, writing in the conclusion is very important. Now you would have come across any section C question wherein there are 2 or 3 parts to the section C question. There will be, say, a practical part. There will be a small, say, 6 to 8 mark, say, theory question that would have been asked. Each of those subsections of the question, make it a point that you write in a proper conclusion for each of the answers. Because see, you would have solved the entire question. So there would be a question about, say, evaluating an aspect, or say they would ask you to discuss and possibly come out with an option, the most appropriate option for the given question. In that scenario, what you need to do is, after getting the entire question solved, at the end, just make it a point to write in the conclusion. What do you conclude? Which option is better? Why? Just a couple of statements, but then that gives in a thorough understanding that you have not only solved the sum, but see, PM is more like providing an answer to the problem that you have in hand. It's not unlike your undergraduation, any of your mathematical paper, wherein you just had to come up with a solution. Over here, you are providing a solution to the problem per se. So in that scenario, writing in a conclusion at the end of each of those sub questions. I'm not even asking you to only write a conclusion at the end of the entire answer, but after every subsection, please write in a concluding statement. That's going to be very important. Simultaneously, also avoid cluttering your answers. Like we all do understand during our undergraduation studies, because we used to just fill in papers just for the sake of garnering marks. Over here, please do not do that. The limited number of words that you can use, and at the same point of time, targeted words specifically for those theory questions, it's going to be very important for you while doing so. Because if you are going to fill up your answers, even if there is some very important core terminology or core sentence that you would have mentioned, it would just get hidden into the clutter. So avoid writing in a lot. Rather, focus on to something that is very much relevant, emphasize on that. So that emphasis will be there if there is no clutter, because if there is a huge amount of data, there would be some relevant data also in it, but that would get hidden into the clutter. So avoid doing that. And one very important thing, although I would be giving you an entire game plan with regards to how to prepare for the performance management subject, but at the same point of time, I would suggest this golden rule of not doing selective studies. Prioritizing is going to be important. Obviously, we do just have 2 weeks in hand. We can't do everything under the sun. But at the same point of time, please do not miss out or do selective studying, miss out on any concepts. So in these next 2 weeks, what you could possibly do is prioritize. There are certain things that I find it a bit difficult. I must pay more attention to it. I should concentrate more onto that. But rather than that, don't do something of that sort, that this particular chapter is less important or this particular concept has not been asked in the previous exams. please do not do selective studies. That's something that I would want to put it out there as a cardinal rule for all of you guys. 2 weeks before the exam, what should your strategy be? Firstly, you need to bifurcate both your theory as well as practical portion of the paper separate. Because just to give you an understanding, see, just imagine section C questions, almost a good 40 to 50% of your section C questions consist of theory. And at the same point of time, even your objective questions has considerable theory in those questions. The problem with all of us is we feel that if we complete our practical questions, we'll in turn also would have covered theory questions, but that's not the scenario. Just take the example of chapters like say budgeting, for example, or say IT, information technology, or say performance management of private entities and all. All these chapters have considerable theory which do not have practical sums into picture. So in that scenario, if you can target practical as well as theory separately, so say for example, you have the next 14 days in your hand and you target what, a good 8 to 9 hours at least. So when I'm saying 8 to 9 hours, I'm saying 8 to 9 productive hours. I'm not saying study hours. So we usually have that tendency that if I'm to study 9 hours, it's like I might take a snack break or a toilet break or a movie break or whatever breaks we have. And then at the same point of time, we'll say that we had a 9-hour study routine today. When I'm saying 9 productive hours, what I mean to say is you need to keep a timer out there. So at the start of the day in the morning, say possibly if you start off your day early in the morning, say at 7 or 6 o'clock, keep a timer. The moment you get up from your study table, stop that timer. So at the end of the day, you need to mark that I have at least a good 8 to 9 hours spent, and not just from a macro standpoint, on a micro note also, those 9 hours should be spent into covering important concepts. Plan your study also, not only from an hour standpoint at a macro note, but also in the on a micro note, also see to it that important concepts are covered. And if 8 to 9 hours are becoming difficult for you, what you guys can do is you guys can switch in theory and practical sums simultaneously. Say in the early hours of the morning, what you can do is you can target theory, because usually people feel sleepy whenever they go for theory. So early morning theory, it's very your mind is fresh. It would be easier for you to go ahead with theory. You can have like say a couple of hours, 2-3 hours of theory completed in the morning. During the afternoon hours, specifically post lunch, it might be a bit sleepy for you guys at that point of time. You can target practical sums at that point of time. And evening, depending upon what is comfortable for you, you can go for theory and practical. But my point is, keep on switching these concepts so that it becomes easier for you and you target both theory as well as practical sums simultaneously. That's going to be very important for you, because practical is going to fetch you say 50 to 60% marks, but the remaining 30-40% marks are going to be theory oriented. And trust me, most of that theory has not, I won't say no connection whatsoever, but not direct connections with whatever you have studied in your practical sums. There will be indirect connections, so you would have to study them separately also. At least a minimum of 2 to 3 revision of core content is required. Now, when I'm saying 2 to 3 revision, it's after your first reading. And with every reading or revision, your content should become all the more summarized. Say, for example, in your first reading, which you would have possibly covered it by now, you would have touched base with all kinds of content, like you would have possibly referred to your reference book, some reference material, some class material, Kaplan, BPP, whichever content you would have taken as your base material. You would have covered everything in your first reading. After that first reading, the first revision, second revision, third revision, the one revision just before the exams should be as big as like something that you can cover in 7 to 8 hours. Because just before the exams, right, it is very important one day prior to the exam for you to touch base with all the important concepts. Otherwise, what happens is you may not be able to recollect everything that you did in these 2 months of studies of yours. So those, the entire content over a period of time by your last revision should be there in the form of a handbook. And if you cannot create notes, you do not have time to do that, what you may as well do is whatever reference book you have, start marking off pointers. Say a particular sum that you feel, even after going through it or even after solving it a lot, I'm not able to say remember it properly, or there is some confusion over it. Just before the exam, I would have to have a check upon that particular sum. So then just mark it out. So in the first revision, what you might as well do is mark out all important concepts. By the second revision, mark out only the very important ones. So by the third revision, just before the exam, you would have like say content which could be easily completed in say 6 to 7 hours time. That's going to be very important, because trust me guys, just before 1 day, 2 days prior to the exam, if you could touch base with each and every concept, things will be a lot more smoother for you as compared to if you would have covered content say 1 or 2 weeks before the exams. The same point of time, as I already mentioned, summarize and mark out smaller content for say chapters like your standard costing, or at the same point of time your costing methods and all, the formulas. Create a small formula book. See, as it is in performance management, you don't have a lot of formulas. So there will be a couple of chapters in which you have considerable formulas. Mark out those specific formulas. At the same point of time, there will be a lot many theories per se. So those theories, there will be specific characteristics or features. Mark out those also. It won't take a lot of time. So just an hour in your everyday's schedule for the next 10 days, and you can have a small handbook that will be of a lot of use in the last couple of days just before your exams. So please try to do that. And at the same point of time, as I already mentioned, please, when we are saying study hours, 8 to 9 study hours at least, please, I mean to say productive study hours, not just sitting there and studying for the sake of it. Now moving towards mock exams and CBE practice, as I had already mentioned it previously, mock exams are going to be very important for you. Mock exams, not only mock exams in the CBE format, but also getting it say checked or getting some kind of feedback on those mocks is very important, because otherwise it's just going to be like you have solved the paper, you know that you are able to complete the paper in the given time limit, but you don't know possibly how can I say if there are any queries or questions, whether I've written the answers properly, whether section C questions should have been answered in a given format, and whether I answered it in that format only. So all these things, right, you will not be able to acquaint yourself with just with the help of solving an exam or solving a mock paper. So what you can do is at least 2 mocks and get those 2 mocks corrected by say your professor and get some feedback on those mocks. That will help you gain a lot of advantage, specifically in section C questions. Section A, B, it may not be needed in terms of getting a feedback, but section C, the way you answer, the way you have structured your answer, say the practical portion, the conclusion, the inference, at the same point of time the theory part or the theory portion, all these things are going to matter a lot, and the marking scheme will be based upon that. At the same point of time, acquaint yourself with using Excel while you're solving these mock papers. So at the same point of time, while you're doing these CBE exams, that will be something that you will be tested upon. So the more you get used to using Excel or answering questions on Excel, typing it out, it will save your time for the exams, and at the same point of time, you will also be able to utilize those formulas properly, so that in the exam you don't face any problems while solving in section C questions. So these are certain things that I would want you guys to focus upon from a mock exam and a CBE practice standpoint. A couple of points not pertaining to the technical aspects of your syllabus, but more important from, your exam, a professional exam, unlike your undergraduation exams, it's not only, it does not only have to do everything with regards to whatever you have studied. It has a lot to do with regards to how do you maintain your mental composure, not only during the preparation point of time, but also during those 3 hours of your exams. So a couple of things, like say in the next couple of weeks, keep your schedule very disciplined. When I'm saying disciplined, try to avoid wasting time on social media, try to avoid wasting time, say watching content, even on say some sort of web series. Try to avoid doing all of this, so that what happens is during the exams, you would have that kind of positivity and confidence that I have given everything that I could in the last 2 weeks. What I have to do, so during the 3 hours of your exam, you will have that mental positivity that I have given everything. You can tell yourself, I have given everything that I could in the last 2 weeks. Whatever I could do, I have already done that. So the maximum that I can do right now is just pour in whatever knowledge that I've garnered in the last couple of months, couple of weeks into these 3 hours. Trust me, that will be a lot more positive for you. You will not feel nervous, because whatever you could do, you have already done it. But at the same point of time, in the next 2 weeks, if you end up wasting time, if you have that feeling, boss, I could have done it better. During the exams also, if you have that kind of a feeling, trust me, there will be some amount of a guilt trip or say kind of regret that will be there during your exams, and that will pan out in your paper as well. because those 3 hours, it's not only about putting in everything that you have learned technically into those sheets of paper, but also how do you maintain that mental balance. Because see, the portion is not difficult, it is relatively vast. So if you have to remember everything, you need to have a clear mind. And for you to have a clear mind, you need to be motivated, and you need, for that motivation, see, I am a person who would want to believe that motivation comes from within, and that can pan out only if you are disciplined enough in the next couple of weeks, right? So the more positivity you drive into your syllabus, into your study schedule, the more negativity there will be, because see, now you have 2 weeks in hand. One thing that you need to keep in mind is whatever you have done in the last month or 2, or whatever you could have done, is completely out of picture. Now the only thing that matters is in the next 2 weeks, I have 14 days in hand, possibly say 8 to 9 hours a day into 14. That's what I can put it in my study schedule. So how are you going to make the maximum out of this? That's where the entire ball game is going to change. Whatever you have done till now, you have to completely let it go, whatever has happened. But now is the time for you to put in complete efforts. In that scenario, there won't be any sort of regret for you, that post your exams, once your exams are done, you are out of the examination center, you'll be like, whatever I could do, I've given it my best shot. I don't have any regret or say any sort of thing to look back upon that I could have done it better or whatever it is. You know you have 14 days in hand, you can give it your best shot. Another thing, reach your center early, because what happens is, if you are like say a half an hour or 45 minutes early to the center, you can calm yourselves out. You can have say enough amount of liquids, enough amount of mental calm you could have developed till then, rather than you rushing over there, don't really have time, can't really maintain your composure, and then that completely pans out in the paper as well. So keep your calm, reach your center early. At the same point of time, I believe like a couple of professors also in the previous sessions must have mentioned that it's very important for you guys to not pay attention to what your fellow students are doing or what they have done. Say for example, you gave your paper, you come out of the session, do not discuss whatever has happened with your friends. At the same point of time, just before the exam as well, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, if you go to the center early, do not discuss how much they have studied, how many mocks they have attended, or how many times revision they have done. What matters over there is how much do you know, and whatever you have studied, you just need to put it out or pour it out in those 3 hours. That's what is required from you. And if you do that well, trust me, there's no chance that you guys are not scoring. I'm not even talking about passing. There's no chance you're not scoring anything below some good percentage marks, like say 60 or 70% marks. So that's something that you need to target. And at the same point of time, now that I've brought this question out of targeting, of what kind of a target that you keep. See, I am someone who's a firm believer of aiming for the moon, because even if you do not achieve or reach that moon, you'll at least fall upon the stars. What it literally means over here is target for those 80 and 90s. Even if you don't achieve that, at least you wouldn't have to worry about the passing percentage, because if you're going to target the passing, trust me, you're always going to be hanging around that balance, and that's not a good position to be in. So what you should be doing is focusing on the right top. If you can do that in the next 14 days, trust me, it's good enough time for you guys. Even if you would not have studied much till now, even if you would have like say possibly completed just one reading, or say in process of completing one reading, trust me, 14 days, good enough time for you guys to get back on track and score good marks, not only pass, but also score good marks in the exams. At the same point of time, when I'm saying maintaining the balance during the examination, very important for you guys to focus, or rather maintain your calm while solving in section C questions. Because what happens is, see, section A and B, either you know or you don't know. You can't do much about it. In section C, what happens over there is, you are required to think. You are required to analyze. See, you have been asked for a suggestion. You have been asked for something to be evaluated. So you require your mental calm and composure to be there. Otherwise, you won't be able to think properly. So what I would suggest is complete your section A and B at the earliest possible, as soon as possible. So there is enough amount of time for section C. And while solving section C also, in the initial 15 minutes itself, decide which section C question would you solve in first. So that, see, target that section C question which you are completely comfortable solving, because once you garner that much amount of confidence, right, other questions also which you initially found it to be a bit difficult, trust me, there will be enough amount of concepts that will be clear till then. There will be positivity, so your mental balance will be there, you will be having a clear mind, you will be able to think better. See, I'm not talking about some kind of say some theoretical concept of some psychological concept of maintaining your positivity or maintaining a positive outlook, nothing of that sort. I'm just talking from the perspective that the more calm and composed you are, the more clear your mind is, and it will be easier for you guys to solve all those section C questions primarily in your exams. Having said this, what are the key topics to be actually focused upon during your exams? See, the initial 4 options that I have mentioned over here, standard costing and budgeting, pricing, performance management and specialist cost and management techniques, these will be important from section C standpoint. Say standard costing, most of your concepts, what you could say, section C questions, the concepts will be from the budgeting budgeting part, but there will be practical questions. So your section C questions will be a mix of both theory as well as proper sums to be solved, practical sums. So standard costing based practical sums may be there, and budgeting oriented theory questions might be there. So my point over here is, target like all section C questions, past exam section C questions. You'll have a lot of these questions. You'll get it on Kaplan, you'll get it on a lot of what you could say mediums through the internet. Please do solve these section C questions properly. I'm not saying that those same section C questions are going to come in, but at least you will get an understanding of the kind of questions that, or the kind of conceptual testing that happens in section C. So standard costing and budgeting, pricing, performance management, as well as specialist cost and management techniques, costing methods, to be honest, all these 4 chapters, right, you will be tested on providing solutions. So you need to have a more kind of a solution driven mindset when you solve section C. Don't go with an answer or a say I have to solve this kind of a mindset. You're out there, they have provided you with a problem, they have asked you for a solution. So think from that mindset. And again, coming back to the point, you need to have sufficient amount of time for this. So try to cover your section A and B as early as possible, so you have sufficient amount of time for your section C questions as well. Having said this, again, I would want to reiterate a couple of points. Do not skip any concept or chapter. Do not do any, say, prioritize your studies based upon, say, for example, there's some concept that you're very strong at. Say you're very good at standard costing. So possibly you may not spend in a lot of time in the next couple of weeks. I'm not saying don't spend in time. Don't turn your strength also into weakness. What I'm saying is what you could spend some less time on standard costing, and say if you have some problems in pricing, you can spend some more time in pricing. So by the time you reach 2 days before the exam, you are level headed with regards to each and every topic. And that's going to be very important, because if you have that kind of a composure, that kind of a level headedness with regards to all the chapters, automatically there will be confidence creeping inside you with regards to the entire paper as such. So before the exam, you'll be pretty confident. And this would be very important, because once you're confident that I know I've touched upon all the concepts, I don't have to worry about any concepts. None of these concepts of the performance management subject do I have as a weakness. Trust me, if you have that kind of confidence, those 3 hours will be yours. 3 hours, 15 minutes, those will be completely yours to go ahead with, and trust me, you're going to have really good paper and score really good marks with respect to that as well. And again, when I'm saying this, prioritize your studies based upon, see, a lot of people might say that in the next couple of weeks, do not touch base with your weaknesses, or say possibly do not touch upon something that you do not feel comfortable about. What I would say is, next another 1 week, you can afford to do so. Because I wouldn't want you to go for an examination half-hearted, in the sense that you are not pretty confident about a few concepts. You are not giving your full-fledged efforts. So what I would say, even if you want to work upon your weaknesses, you have still another week, post which you can just focus upon prioritizing how to revise and how to solve your mocks and all. But still, for the next 1 week, you can still spend time converting your weaknesses into strengths. But also in these 2 weeks, at least try to have 2 or 3 mocks, at least 2, and if possible, please have 3 mocks. Now we'll throw upon the dais for any questions pertaining to the session that we had. At the same point of time, any questions if you guys have with respect to performance management, how to keep your outlook, what all things to be taken care of during the exams, before the exams. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. The dais is open for questions.
So we are asking us
Yeah.
that if, sir, I wanted to ask in section C, do we have to show all the workings in detail, or can we directly get the values and show the workings, that how did we exactly get the value?
Really good question, 𝗲𝗻. So see, what happens is, think from an examiner standpoint. The examiner needs to know how did you arrive at the answer. So just by putting in formulas over there and just directly if you write the answer out there, as an examiner, I might not be in a right position to see whether you know the entire concept or did you arrive at the answer in the right sense. So I'm not saying write it in a format how you used to do in your undergraduate studies, wherein you used to mention each and every statement or each and every line item before coming to the answer. But at least provide that much amount of evidence that shows an audit trail kind of, wherein how did you arrive at the answer. So for example, if you have to calculate any of the variances, so rather than directly mentioning, say it is a favorable or an adverse variance, also mention how did you arrive at that. Actual quantity, standard price, actual budgeted quantity, budgeted price. Just mention those terms, do in some sort of calculation, so that as an examiner, or as someone who's checking your paper, I have an understanding that you arrived it in this particular format. I'm not asking you to go in depth, but at least given some sort of an evidence which showcases how did you arrive at the answer. Yeah.
Next, we have a question for someone moving from MA to PM, which is the base paper for PM.
Yeah.
Do you have any specific advice or anything specific they should focus on or revise before starting with PM?
So this is, so see, considering that you have had MA completed and at the same point of time you have a good base of MA, so costing methods and at the same point of time possibly standard costing would be something that would be easier for you relatively. So what you could do is, you could just go through marginal costing, standard costing and brush through concepts of absorption costing, because a lot of these concepts will be then repeated in chapters like budgeting, advanced variances. At the same point of time, some of these concepts like marginal costing, the concepts will be covered in CVP analysis. So a lot of these concepts will be covered again, and in costing methods as well. Say absorption costing, most of the methods like say target costing, ABC methods, ABC costing and all will be it is like why did absorption costing didn't work, and that's the reason why we have ABC today, a refined version of absorption costing. So if your concepts of absorption costing, marginal costing and standard costing, at least at the base level, if it's clear, right, PM will be far more easier for you. So at least brush through with respect to how what are these three methods of costing, and at the same point of time, if you could solve in a few questions, a few examples, then it would be far more easier for you to start off with performance management as well.
We have another question by Asen.
Yeah.
So please explain the difference between discuss, analyze, evaluate, etc. in section C, and how do we know that we have to mention only theory, only calculations, or both?
Perfect. So see, it also depends. Now say for example, if it's mentioned discuss or evaluate. See, when you say evaluate, enumerate, you are more practical in nature. Yeah, the questionnaire is asking the answer from a more practical standpoint, a sum standpoint, and when they are using terminologies like discuss, they want you to also put forth your conclusion or put in some what you would say contextual evidence before coming towards the conclusion. So whenever you use terminologies like discuss, and also don't take these words in isolation. You also need to check what the question is asking overall. So if they are saying discuss after proving something, so then you would have to mention or say prove that entire practical sum, come to the conclusion, and also mention what does this conclusion mean. Like say for example, you arrive at a variance. So what does this variance mean? If it's an adverse variance, how does this affect the decision making of the company? So you have to discuss a couple of lines onto that. So discuss primarily means a more into theory. Evaluate, enumerate, then it's like multiple options are provided and you have to choose the best option. But even in those, you would have to give the concluding statement. It doesn't mean that just because they have mentioned evaluate, enumerate, you just solve and leave it over there. You describe after that also what have you concluded, like what does this number that you have come out with, what does that number mean? How does that make a difference? Like from a decision making standpoint for a company, how does that make any difference for the company? So if it is, again coming to a question, if it's discuss, describe, It has more to do with theory. If it's evaluate, enumerate, it has more to do with practical. But in both the cases, even if it's a practical point, make it a point that you have good amount of concluding statements post coming to the final answer.
Another question we have is, for someone who has failed at PM already, is there any advice you have for something that they can do differently this attempt for them to clear the exam?
Very important question. What you guys would have to firstly do, firstly it's very important for you guys to solve in a few papers, because conceptually you would have been tested both in terms of sitting for your lectures or studying through your first round of preparation, at the same point of during exams also. What you need to understand is where are you making those mistakes, which all concepts you're finding it difficult. So solve as many mock papers as possible and get them corrected with some sort of a moderator or someone who has taught you. If you could get those papers corrected, it will help you gain a feedback of how do you need to change the way you are answering the questions. Because in the last few months that you have studied, conceptually you would not be finding it really difficult. The problem might be, I'm just possibly making a guesstimate, but still the major problem would be, how do you pour these concepts into the paper in those 3 hours? For that, what I would suggest is solve in more papers in an examination format, in that examination mood, and at the same point of time get it checked, get it moderated, get some feedback on those answers, so you will be in a better position to recoup or make changes into whatever the way you were solving your papers. You can make some adequate changes upon that. Yeah.
We have a follow-up question. Can we include advantages and disadvantages instead of strengths and weaknesses for certain concepts, say ROI and RI for section C, and how much should be connected to the case in hand?
Perfect. So see, what happens is there will be isolated questions. I would actually like to thank you for this question, because I ended up missing out on a very important point. So what happens in section C questions are, so see, there will be one core problem. Say for example, a company is facing one particular core problem. They have asked you to solve it, or they have asked you to provide some sort of guidance or a solution for it. And then there will be isolated theory questions. Say, like as you rightly mentioned, advantages of RI, advantages of ROI, advantages of standard costing or whatever. Now, what will happen is, at the forefront, just by looking at the question, you will feel that these two are separate questions. I need to answer them separately. What I would suggest is, once you're done with the question, right, the main practical company oriented question or the main practical problem oriented question, because see, the way that they'll be positioning the question also, the isolated questions, isolated theory questions won't be truly isolated. So if you could relate those questions to the point in hand. So for example, if the company, so the main practical question is pertaining to say budgets, and the theory question that has been asked is pertaining to say standard costing. So if you could relate how budgetary evidences can help you come out with actuals and compare the variances and come out with a conclusion, like what kind of a decision that the company can take. If you can make that kind of a linkage, trust me, the examiner, the person who's checking your paper will be all the more impressed, because they are not wanting to just test you in terms of interpretation of theory or just whatever you have learnt, but they would want to see your application also into real life situations. So if you could link your theory, the isolated, so-called isolated, I wouldn't say it's completely isolated also, it will be somewhere down the line linked to the main practical forefront question, but if you could link it both together, kudos to you guys, and you will be earning some good marks because of that. So you should be doing that.
One final question is, I believe for someone for their plans in the next exam quarter, should they choose PM with another paper, and how good is a combination of PM and FM for a single attempt?
Good question. So PM and FM, there are quite a few concepts which are there's a few concepts of FM which are also covered in PM, a few concepts of PM which are also covered in FM. And when you're talking about a quarter, it's 3 months. Trust me, if you guys are not working anywhere, if the person who is asking the question, if they are a student, you can very well manage. There's no doubt whatsoever that these two subjects cannot be managed. But if you are a working professional, then it also depends upon the kind of the amount of leave that you might possibly get. So if you're getting in say a month's leave or something, if you're able to at least drive in these next 3 months 3 to 4 hours a day, apart from say the lectures that you'll be attending or whatever, at least 2 to 3 hours in the initial month or so, and the later month if you could have like say 5 or 6 hours apart from your work, you can have both the papers done. When I'm saying 5 to 6 hours, that's excluding the lectures or whatever you would be sitting for. 5 to 6 hours of your self-study. If you can get in that much amount of time, you can go for that. Otherwise, for working professionals, what I would suggest is go for one paper at a time, because it would be difficult managing both of them along with your work schedule, because you do not know the kind of work pressure that will be there in the coming months for your work or what you could say work profile. But for students, very much possible, and there are a lot of interlinking concepts. The way the paper is also structured for both FM and PM is very much similar. So you will be having an advantage of having, like say, both preparing for both the exams. And I have quite a good amount of students who have covered both FM and PM. And because I also teach FM, I can assure you guys that having both FM and PM would be a really good combination, but you would have to spare in good amount of time. So if you are a student, please go ahead with both FM and PM and structure your study plan accordingly. So with this, we come towards the end of this session. There will be a few more of these master sessions for different subjects that we will be having post this session. So I would request you guys to please like, share and subscribe the channel so as to stay connected with our future sessions also. Thanks a lot, guys.